Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The budget of the state of North Carolina now is over $19 billion. That's a lot of money. Who watches over the expenditure of this money for you and me as taxpayers? That's the function of the state auditor. And Beth Wood is here with me. She is in that position now, recently elected, and doing a very good job. She's a product of East Carolina University and many other experiences in auditing all over the state. We'll meet and talk with her in just a few seconds.
Sponsored in part by Wachovia, a Wells Fargo company, helping North Carolina people realize their financial goals since 1879. And through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.
Beth, I should have said that you are the first lady to occupy the role of state auditor, and why a career choice like this for you?
I'm not sure it was exactly a career choice. I was a dental hygienist for 10 years, went back to school at East Carolina, got my accounting degree, and just got into governmental auditing and accounting, and the career just moved from one aspect to another. I eventually ended up in the state auditor's office, worked there for probably about 7 years, and decided, you know what? I can do this. I can do this job and do it well. And it was probably the fact that I did grow up on a farm. You know, times were tough. I can remember that. And then I get into an office where we're actually auditing the taxes that my parents and my friends and my family pays. And I thought, this is serious business. So I became engrossed in the office. I worked real hard in the office, moved up in the office, and I thought, you know what? I can do this. And so in 2004, when Ralph Campbell lost the election, I decided I was going to run in 2008.
Well, we're glad you're there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, help educate all of us. We talk of financial audits and we talk of performance audits. Which comes first and what's the function?
The financial audits are statutorily required, mandated by the feds also, and we have no choices about those. So the financial statement audits are done on our universities, our community colleges, and our state agencies. And the universities and community colleges annually, the universities and state agencies annually, and the community colleges every other year. But that's simply an audit of the numbers, the classifications of the numbers, were the transactions recorded correctly, and the financial statements are simply a statement of the financial condition of whoever we audit. So we're just really looking at the numbers. Were they recorded right? Were they classified correctly?
Not much judgment in that kind of audit. It's a routine kind of relationship.
I would say that it's routine. We really do look at internal controls, what policies, procedures do they have in place to make sure those numbers are, and so we might get some judgment calls there. But you're right, it's pretty routine. In a performance audit, and this is where I think we have the most opportunity for finding waste and abuse, this is more about how did you spend those monies? Did you spend them for the right things? Did you get what you intended to get out of those monies that were spent? Because you can put money into a program and you can account for the dollars correctly and report the dollars correctly, but if you didn't accomplish anything, or if you spent more than you should have, or you had more resources than you really needed to do that job, you wasted taxpayer dollars. And so the performance audits, we have less resources for them, but it really is the area to find the waste and abuse that's going on in the state.
Does that audit then serve the purpose for the federal grant that I get, for example, in the university? Is the same procedure required?
It is not. A performance audit is different from what we call our federal grant audit. We do a financial statement audit, then we also get about $19 billion in federal grants, Medicaid, food stamps, monies for our highways, monies for our clean water and our drinking water, another $19 billion from the feds. And those audits, again, it's statutorily mandated, it's mandated by the feds, and we look at those programs and we determine, were those monies spent for the intended purpose? Were those monies doing what they were supposed to? So you have financial statement audits, you have audits of federal grants, and then we have these performance audits that go back into our state agencies and our universities to decide if we are efficiently and effectively spending the tax dollars.
Do you teach the staff that you have, say I'm a new graduate, I'm coming in to work for you? I guess the best way I can put it is I'm supposed to be intelligently skeptical when I go in to look at a performance audit?
Absolutely. Our standards, the standards by which we audit, require us to practice professional skepticism. So we walk into some clerks of court and you'll hear the clerk say, "Oh, this lady's been with me for 20 years. I trust everything she does." We can't take that attitude. When we go in, we need to go decide where we're going to audit, where are the risks for problems, audit in that direction, and then look at the evidence and draw our conclusions. We cannot walk into an audit with any foregone conclusions, and that's what professional skepticism is. You keep asking the questions until you have verification and you're satisfied with the answer.
That then requires of you a training program of your staff that would require constant refreshment, does it not? Laws change.
You're absolutely right. Standards change, and the other side of that is, even though they come out of, and now it's a 5-year program to be a CPA, even though they come out of a university, the university professors will tell you, we're not teaching you auditing and accounting, we're teaching you the tools to go learn auditing and accounting. And for-profit auditing is very different from doing a tax return, which is very different from doing governmental auditing. And so it's almost like a specialization. So when we bring a graduate into our office, we then have to take over and teach them governmental accounting, because if you don't know governmental accounting, you don't know how to go audit it. Mm-hmm. And that's a very stringent 2-year program, 2 to 3 year program in our office. And then as you develop certain competencies, then we have to expand on those, because you can't learn everything in the first year in the state auditor's office. So it's a continual training program. And the other side of that is, again, these auditing standards, the standards by which the state auditor's office performs their audits, requires that my staff sit in a formal training class 40 hours every year. So it doesn't matter if the General Assembly cuts me 10 people or 20 people or half my staff. I am required by auditing standards to train the other half that's left there. And what we try to do is make sure that the training is applicable to the job that you do. Wow, what a concept.
In your campaigning, you were very clear that you were making the point, saying to the political elements in our state, both parties, don't come here. We're going to do this objectively, according to the law. And I know human nature like you know human nature. What do you do when one of these performance auditors comes and says, "Madam Auditor, this is a case of flagrant deviation"? What flags does that raise for you?
Well, if it looks like flagrant deviation, then I make sure he has all the evidence, or she has all the evidence to support the conclusion that they drew. Mm-hmm. And then I take these audits and I look at them and I ask them all the hard questions that I think will come from people trying to deny whether or not that finding is true. And then I sit down, and again, the standards require, when I audit an organization, the organization's supposed to sit down and have a chance to refute these findings. And when they start trying to refute them, or they start trying to get me to take them out of the audit, I basically say, I have evidence that says this is a finding. You bring me the evidence that says it is not a finding, and it will go away. And until you can do that, it stays in there. And when people respond to my findings, if they try to muddy up the waters, if you will, with a lot of verbiage, I get to respond to their response and basically call them on the carpet and say, you could not provide me with any evidence that supports anything you've said. And most people don't want to be embarrassed. And so what comes out in my audits are the facts, the truth, supported by evidence.
Are you worried about what you see, having been in office now for a period of time? Is the incidence of this kind of thing minimal? What are the routine you would expect in an organization as big as the state of North Carolina? What's your judgment on?
My biggest concern that I have is that the state of North Carolina, state government, has been rolling in a particular direction for a number of years.
Yeah.
And you stop and think about it, state government is a place where a lot of people want to retire. So what you have in a lot of these huge agencies, they're processing, administering huge programs, they're processing lots of transactions. You have people who want to continue doing things the way they've always done them. They're inefficient, they're ineffective, and the state's wasting money. And so it's that unwanting to change, not wanting to do things better, not wanting to do what's best for the state of North Carolina because people just don't want to change. We have a lot of inefficiencies that's resulting in a lot of waste in North Carolina. I am seeing that, yes, and that is my biggest concern. I know there's corruption. I know there is misappropriation of monies, but I think the bigger piece here is the state of North Carolina and the way we do business is antiquated, and nobody's willing to look around and decide how can we do things better. And I will tell you, in my own office, we looked at, I led the charge a few years ago. We were continuing to get standards of how to do our audits, and we were just being bombarded with more and more requirements. And I said, you know what, guys? We got to step back and look at what are we doing that's 20 years old that we don't need to do anymore. Let's get more efficient. So we hired a consultant to come in and show us where we were just wasting time. I also am looking at the competencies in my office where people are not performing at the level that I'm paying them. We're doing something about that. We're providing training for those who want to be better, and we're basically disciplining those who don't want to do any better. And I'm providing training to my staff on how to manage your people better, how to manage your audits better. And I am the only state agency that is properly implementing the performance evaluation program for our employees. OSP, Office of State Personnel, will tell you the State Auditor's Office is the only one who's evaluating their staff in accordance with the policies. So I've done everything, I'm doing everything I can to make sure my office is efficient as it should be. It is up to date on how we do things. And across the board, that is not true in state government.
Now that is your policy, looking inside state government and inside agencies.
Yes.
What about the millions of dollars that the state spends contracting with outside contractors who come in? How do you cast an eye over what happens there performance-wise, or whatever the contract expects?
We have taken a look at several contracts, and that's basically what we're doing. We're looking at contracts that have been entered into. We've looked at some of the larger ones, and we've looked at contracts that have been entered into. What we're finding is that contracts have not been properly negotiated. In several instances, the vendor wrote the contract, and you know whose side that was written on, to whose benefit, and then the contracts were signed by the state of North Carolina. And on more than one occasion, we're finding that the state of North Carolina got the raw end of the deal. We're spending more money on these contracts than we should have. When the vendor does not perform or meet what they're supposed to do, there's no recourse for us, the state of North Carolina, because there was no non-performance clause put in the contract. We have one major, huge contract with the state of North Carolina, and there is a prohibition within the contract that does not allow anybody to audit the numbers. The numbers that the state of North Carolina is being charged, we are not allowed to audit any of the charges. We found that a vendor who we buy supplies from statewide, the state of North Carolina, we looked at one agency, we looked at several transactions, and over a 6-month period, this vendor overcharged the state of North Carolina $300,000. That's just over a 6-month period. We found another contract where a vendor put in an e-procurement system for the state of North Carolina. It just allows every agency to go online and do their ordering rather than having to write up all these purchase orders and things. And we found that the vendor that put this system in, the system was supposed to pay for itself. It was supposed to cost the state of North Carolina about $57 million, and it ended up costing the state of North Carolina over $120 million.
Now, Beth, when you get that kind of material assembled and evidence sitting there on your desk, to whom do you turn? The governor, the legislative leadership? What do you do with such powerful evidence of incompetence?
In the past and all along, and it's really only the requirement, is that the state auditor's office is responsible for finding these issues, and it's our responsibility to put this information out to the General Assembly and to the governor and to others, the management of whatever entity. And I find that we have some routine audits that nobody really needs to, really do anything about except the agency head. And then there's some audits that need legislative help, and then there's some audits that the governor needs to be involved. Pardon me. So what I'm trying to do is take those that need legislative involvement or the governor's involvement, and I'm sitting down with them and walking them through the findings, how egregious they are, and how much money it's costing the state of North Carolina. And you'll find that there are 3 bills been introduced this legislative session because the General Assembly has appeared to hear what we've been down and told them. They've been receptive of the information that we've brought to them, and so whether we get legislation in place that will really do something about these issues, we will watch that for the future.
When you go to an agency head sometimes, do you immediately sense that the issue is not criminal? It's just a plain incompetence sometimes, or they just don't know the law. Do you take time to educate them to what their obligations are?
We do. We sit down and talk with them once we do an audit and we have our findings. We sit down and talk with the agency head and their staff and talk about what the findings are. We also have made sure that they truly are findings, and then we talk with them about the repercussions if they don't do something about the findings. Now, in most cases, agency heads are waiting to hear what we find. They are anxious to hear what information we have. Some of them try to explain them away and they're not very interested, but the vast majority on the financial side are interested in the issues that we find. Some of the performance audits are not as readily received because it will mean making a change and doing things differently than the way you've always done them. So there's not as much reception to the performance audits as it is to the financial audits.
Now that you've had this cycle of the first walkthrough, let us say, of the Beth Wood's administration as state auditor, what have you found about the climate of the relationship now in terms of economy, the need to be more careful with expenditure, to be more faithful to the performance requirements? Are attitudes changing? People working to help? Listen to you?
I'm not so sure that, again, people that are working for state agencies see that much benefit from our audits. I do believe in this just go around, I've just got 1 year, two legislative sessions, but I didn't really have that much for the General Assembly last year. But I've had more for them this year. And so I believe there is more attention on what we found and how egregious it is, how much it's costing the state of North Carolina. So my thought and the feeling that I have right now is that the General Assembly is paying attention. The agency heads are willing to listen, but again, we'll look at the next year to see if anything really changes.
Have you encountered major disappointments in this work?
I have. I say major disappointments in how I thought the state of North Carolina was probably doing a better job at how we do business. I thought in some cases there are just some fundamental things about how you do business that are obvious based on my audits that others would have been knowledgeable of and done something about. So I would say that I'm not surprised at some of the budget shortfall we've seen over the last 2 years.
Let me turn the question around. Have you found places where you've been encouraged? You've seen real dramatic change in attitude. You see people really trying to do what you want to do, say that they should do.
I can't say that I have seen people jumping out there and saying, wow, this is a huge issue. We need to do something about that. From an agency perspective, it's been more so at the General Assembly level.
All right, now let's look at the next 5 years. Having done all of this, what's on the agenda ahead?
Well, I want to make sure, number one, that the competence in my office is the best it can be. I am out recruiting and looking for the bright graduate from accredited universities, obviously, but people who want to be trained well. They want to do a good job, take a lot of pride in their work, and they want to work in a place that they can be proud and they know they're making a difference. But I'm also looking for that person who realizes that we don't pay a lot of overtime, and I can't put you out on some luxurious traveling expense account. So basically you come to work 8 hours a day, you do a good job, you trained well, your work makes an impact, and then you get to go home and spend time with your family. So I'm really working on the competencies of my staff and making them the best auditors they can be. And then I'm looking for global issues like contracting in North Carolina. That cuts across every state agency. So if you've got waste in one aspect, you've probably got it across a lot of state agencies. I'm looking at programs like Medicaid. What are things that we could do? Because with Medicaid, while that's federal money, there is a state match. So it is costing you and I at a state level. So I'm looking at what are we doing? Why is Medicaid monies being spent, abused, misappropriated? How's that happening? And then I'm concentrating on either large dollar programs, large dollar areas, or I'm looking at an area that might be systemic. And so over the next 2.5 years, is that what I have left? And down the road, because I do plan to run in 2012. As long as I'm making an impact on how state government does business, I plan to run in 2012. But I am looking at making an impact on how the state of North Carolina does business. We're doing it more efficiently, more effectively, with less dollars to the taxpayers.
How often do you get to sit down with your fellow cabinet officers and talk about the state of North Carolina in the sense of its financial stability, the very things you've been talking about? Do you all once in a while just sort of gather together and say, these things have got to happen, that these changes have got to be made?
We do not. At this point in time, I talk with the governor, and she's a great listener. So I talk with the governor, and the expectation is that she will take that information back to her cabinet secretaries. But as far as the other elected officials, there is not an opportunity. We have not. Now, the governor put together a luncheon a couple of weeks ago. I was not able to attend, but she put together a luncheon, and I'm hoping that she's going to keep that going, because it gives the elected officials, the elected Council of State, a chance to sit down and kind of among ourselves talk about the state of the state. And so I'm hoping she will keep that plan up.
Do then the members of the legislature, like for example the Appropriations Committee people, wanting to know what happens to those tax dollars, do they give you a chance to state your case once in a while?
They do. They give all the state agencies a chance to state their case. But this time they asked me back a couple of times to get more in depth into what I know first about my office. They wanted to know more about my office and what we did. And then they wanted to know areas that I was finding in state government that need some improvement. And so they really have this year given me an opportunity, but I think it's because we're building a trust relationship. They know my audits are about the facts, and they won't have egg on their face if they follow the findings in one of my audits.
If you get a sense of achievement now after about 2 years of this good hard work you've been putting in here, you see things changing?
I do. I believe we're on the right track. It's not as fast as I'd like to see it, because the state is in dire straits. $4.8 billion budget shortfall last year. It looks like it's going to be about $1.3 billion this year, and the projection for 2012 is $3 billion. And I asked my staff Friday at a staff meeting, wouldn't it be wonderful if we stepped out there and could identify $1 billion of that $3 billion shortfall? They're fired up and ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Do you get a chance, just without having an audit in front of you, do you sit down and talk with agency heads about general practices from time to time? For example, while I was president of the university, I would have liked to have had the chance to have this kind of conversation. Do you do this out of the context of contesting something?
I sit down, I'm at most of the exit conferences, so when we deliver an audit, I have an opportunity to sit down, but it pretty much is about an audit. But I am making it a point to be at the community college exit conferences, the university exit conferences. I've had conversations with Erskine Bowles about the university system. He's been very interested in what my auditors are seeing out there and information that I can give him that will help him do a better job. And then, of course, with the agency heads. So I'm doing it, but it is only in the context of from an audit perspective.
Thank you for coming over and teaching school this morning, Beth, and thank you for the wonderful work you're doing for all of us in the state of North Carolina. And friends, if you want to know who's watching over the tax dollar, here she is, and she's told you the story of her incredible efforts to make the functioning of our government that much more efficient. Thank you for letting us visit. Until next week then, have a good week and good night.
Sponsored in part by Wachovia, a Wells Fargo company, helping North Carolina people realize their financial goals since 1879. And through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.